Number 1. The basement door. When I was a teenager, and I decided I was too old to go trick-or-treating on Halloween anymore, I would spend the time home, while my parents took my younger siblings out, and into town for the event. I really liked this because we lived over an hour's drive out of town, so I would have the house to myself for a very long time. Our house was out in the country, way out in the country, in a relatively rural area to begin with. There wasn't a house that I knew of for several miles out there. That is how rural it was. Plus, I had an aunt and uncle who lived in town. More than likely, my dad would be there for a while my mom was out with the kids. If my dad had one too many beers, they might end up staying out pretty late, and I would have the house to myself for a long time. So I did what any boy my age would do if he were home alone on Halloween. I watched a lot of scary movies. It was my go-to back then and now as to what I do on Halloween. But back then it did actually scare me just a little bit. So I did begin to get really nervous and jittery as the night went on. However, that also didn't keep me from watching more horror movies. It was still what I wanted to do. I got a call from my mom during the night, telling me that they were staying over at my aunt's house for the night. My dad had been drinking and kept everyone up too late, and the younger kids had fallen asleep. So they decided to simply sleep over and would be home sometime the next day. I went back to watching my movies, happy that I had the whole house to myself. So I decided I would stay up as late as I could and fall asleep on the couch watching movies. I also didn't want to go back into my bedroom at that point, as I had already freaked myself out quite a bit by watching those movies. The house that we lived in was a ranch. The living room was right next to the kitchen. Also, the door to the basement was in the kitchen. From sitting on the couch in the living room, you could look directly into the dining area of the kitchen and see the back door to the house. The basement door faced the back door, so you couldn't see it unless it was opened. And even if it was open, you would not be able to see into the basement from that angle. The basement of the house was an unfinished basement, but it ran the entire length of the entire house. Other than to do laundry or to put something down there for storage, though, I was rarely in the basement for any reason. It had to be around midnight, which for me at the time was pretty late to be up. Although I had all the lights out in the house to make watching the movies more atmospheric, there was a light on the back porch that I couldn't turn out. Other than the TV, it was the only other light in or out of the house at that moment. Anyway, I was watching my movie when something from the other room caught my eye. It was from the corner of my eye, but of course anything at that moment was going to surprise me since I was watching those scary movies. When I looked over into the living room, I noticed something that really scared me. The basement door, which I was positive was closed and latched, was slightly open. And then, watching it, the door opened more and more, very slowly. I was frozen in place and seized by fear as I watched the door opening. I was pretty sure that no windows were open in the house, so it was unlikely that it was air pressure causing this to happen. But still, I was telling myself that there had to be an explanation, and that I was only scared because I had been scaring myself to death all evening watching horror films. After the door had opened about halfway, it stopped moving. I was able to see decently over in that area because of the back porch light. After it stopped moving, nothing happened for a few moments. Then slowly, I saw a face close to the door begin peeking out from around the doorframe. Although it was bright enough for me to tell that it looked like a human face, it was not enough for me to make out any features. However, I knew that the face was looking at me, and it knew I was looking back at it. Quickly, an arm reached out and grabbed the door and it slammed it. I jumped up, put my feet on the couch, as if that was going to help, and didn't know what to do. I was too scared to get up and go check it out, but I did run into the kitchen, grab a knife out of the knife block, and run back and jumped on the couch as quickly as I could. I looked over at the front door to make sure it was locked, and then I remained on the couch holding the knife. I stayed right there on that couch until I eventually fell asleep. It was a long time later, and I didn't even mean to fall asleep. I only woke up when my parents made it back home and found me on the couch with a knife. When I told them what happened, my dad went and searched the house. He found that the window in the outside basement door was broken, but there was no one in the house. We never found out who broke into the house that Halloween night, but I was uncomfortable being home alone for a long time after. Number 2. The lights. This happened when I was a teenager. My parents weren't the greatest in the world, and I often found myself doing a lot of things without their help. One thing was, if I wanted to spend time at a friend's house, they almost never would give me a ride. We lived way out in the country, so it was pretty hard to get there otherwise. I had a bicycle that I rode a lot, but that didn't always really help either. It was easy enough to ride on the dirt roads, but some of the roads were also gravel, and those were much harder to ride on. I could ride, but it would have to be on the side of the road. Riding on the gravel itself would have left me with ruptured bike tires. When I was 16 years old, a good friend of mine was having a Halloween party, and I really wanted to go. Knowing that I would probably be leaving the party really late, I knew there was no chance that my parents were going to come and pick me up after the party. So I didn't even ask them, and I rode my bike to the party. This friend of mine actually lived off the hills, in a more populated area with paved roads, so it was a very long bike ride there and back. The party was pretty fun, as much as I can remember it. I ended up staying pretty late into the night. I think I recall a friend offering me a ride home, but he had a small car and I had no chance of fitting my bike into it, so I turned him down. Looking back on what happened that night, I really wish that I hadn't. It was a dark night and it had been cloudy all day. There was light when I was riding out on the paved street, but not immediately when I got up to the road that took me up into the hills. It was paved for a little while after that, when the road would turn to gravel first and then eventually dirt. It was the darkness that caused me such a bad problem at first. I misjudged where the gravel road began and ended up riding my bike onto it. Nearly immediately, the front tire of my bike busted and went flat. There was nothing I could do to fix the tire. I didn't carry a patch kit or a pump on me, so I had no choice but to walk my bike the rest of the way home. And it was going to be a very long walk. As I was walking my bike along the side of the gravel road, I was startled by a bolt of lightning up in the sky. This was all I needed, because if it began raining, there was no way I could make it home without getting soaked. I was also so far away from home that it wouldn't do me any good to hurry either. Fortunately, though, it didn't begin raining. There was quite a bit of thunder and lightning, but it seemed like that was all there was. And that was a small comfort, though, knowing that it would take me a long time to actually get home. To make things clear, the only thing I was scared of at that moment was getting wet. I never liked being wet, and it's even worse wearing wet clothes. I was used to taking walks or riding my bike out in the dark, so I wasn't afraid of the dark or the country at all. As the night wore on, I noticed something a little strange. I'm not sure how it didn't catch my eye sooner, but I thought that I saw a small flame up ahead, up on the hill. Whatever it was, it looked like it floated for a few moments in the air, and then it was gone. I figured that it had to be some natural phenomena that I didn't know about and didn't think much about it. That is, until I saw it another time. It was just as far up ahead of me as it had been before, so it seemed like it was moving in the same direction that I was. It was really weird, and the atmosphere at the time was making it even more creepy. Unfortunately, the lightning wasn't the kind that lit up the entire area, so I wasn't able to get a good look at what was going on. I had a light on my bike, but the last thing that I was going to do was shine that light on whatever was out there and get its attention. I just kept walking and looking at the light. It took me a while, but finally the light was facing me. I guess that is what I am trying to say. And it looked like the eyes, nose, and smile of a jack-o'-lantern. When I first noticed that, I felt a chill going down my spine because it was just a weird thing to see. And I assumed that what I was seeing was someone carrying a jack-o'-lantern out in the middle of the woods. That was just a pretty scary thought. But then it happened. I finally got one of those big cracks of lightning. You know the ones I mean. The ones that make it look like daytime for a split second. Plus, I just happened to be looking at the light when it happened. And there was a jack-o'-lantern there. But there was no person holding it. It was just there. That split second seemed to last for a very long time, and it was chilling. But what was more chilling was that when the lightning flash was over, the jack-o'-lantern light was no longer there. It was just gone. I tried hurrying. Even though I mentioned before that it was pointless. I didn't believe in ghosts, but I didn't know how to explain it myself. And that lack of explanation made it terrifying. I didn't see the light again before I got home, but I was scared the entire walk home. I didn't know if it was a ghost or a man or something else out there messing with me. I also didn't want to find out. Number 3. The Screams. When I was growing up, I was the oldest of all the cousins in my family. We didn't go out trick-or-treating on Halloween, though. Our parents would go out to the bars all night, and all the cousins would come over to my house. I would babysit them while all the grown-ups were out. We didn't feel like we missed out, though, by not going trick-or-treating, though. We were given bowls of candy to eat, and I would always make popcorn while we played games and sat around watching Halloween specials on VHS. All of us lived in the same tri-state area, but in different rural areas. My house was in West Virginia, and not as rural as my cousins lived in. We lived in a trailer that was in the general area that there were a few other trailers, but they were spread out enough that it seemed like we were really living in an area by ourselves. I was 15 years old when this story takes place. I had one younger brother and 3 cousins that I had to look out for on Halloween night. My brother was the second oldest at 12, and all the other kids were 10 and younger. The night was going by no differently than it always did for the most part. However, as the night went on, I eventually heard what I thought was a scream off in the distance. I wasn't sure though, as it sounded pretty faint, and the kids had the television turned up pretty loud. Also, it was Halloween, so it wouldn't have been totally unusual to hear a scream. It didn't mean that it was a scream of terror or anything. I decided to get up and go onto the porch of the trailer to have a look around. The kids didn't even notice me because they were so engaged in what I remember was the Great Pumpkin. So I went onto the porch and closed the door behind me. At first, everything seemed very normal, but after that, I heard what sounded like a gunshot. Now, this wasn't an abnormal thing to hear around the area I lived in. People were always shooting their guns for one reason or another. But what frightened me was hearing a woman screaming immediately after the gunshot. And it wasn't just one scream either. She was screaming and pleading with God and whoever else to help her. Scared and unsure of what to do, I ran back into the house and locked the door. I quickly went to the phone, called 911, and told them what I had heard. Unfortunately, being in a rural area as we were, I knew it could take a long time for anyone to get out there. The kids weren't worried or anything yet. Hearing a gunshot was not something unusual, as I mentioned, but my brother Bobby was concerned, and he came up to me and asked me what was going on. I told him to keep an eye on the kids while I was talking on the phone. There was suddenly a loud thud hitting the front door of the house. The kids were surprised but not scared, as we weren't watching anything really scary. One of the kids went to open the door, and it didn't click in time for me to get up and stop her from doing so. Well, she opened the door and immediately screamed. A bloodied-up woman lurched into the house, and the kids all ran away from her. The woman quickly closed the door shut and locked it, and begged for me to call the police. I told her I was on the phone with them and someone was coming. However, it wasn't too long after that when we heard someone else pounding on the door. The bloody woman tried not making a noise, as if she was trying to hide the fact that she was in there, but the pounding on the door didn't stop. Of course, the kids were really freaked out by this point. Hell, I was really freaked out too, but trying my best to hide it. I really didn't know what to do. I just kept talking to the lady who was on the line for 911, hoping she would be able to do something to get the police to the house sooner than later. The bloody lady was screaming at the guy to leave, telling him that there were children here and she was scaring them. He responded with a gunshot that scared us all, but it became apparent after a moment that he hadn't shot at the house. After the gunshot, the man started pounding on the door again, demanding that the woman come out if she didn't want him to come in. When she screamed and cried no, the man started pounding on the door really hard. He was truly getting all the children terrified beyond belief. We suddenly and thankfully heard the police siren off in the distance. Very shortly after that, the pounding stopped, and I heard footsteps running off on the porch. I didn't know what to think until I could see that the flashing police lights were right outside of my door. An officer knocked on the door, and this time we opened it. I had Bobby still looking after the kids while I talked to the police and the woman. The officer who was out there was luckily close to our area when I called and arrived alone. The man who had been coming after that woman had run off before he got there, but he waited there with us to make sure he was there in case the guy came back. The man was a guy who didn't live in the area. The woman was his girlfriend, who was sleeping with one of our neighbors. He caught them in the act and shot the guy, who luckily didn't die. The blood on the woman was a man's blood. She hadn't been injured. Her boyfriend chased her down and then ran off into the woods to get away from the cops. It took them a while to find the guy. It was a very terrifying Halloween, not only up to then, but for the time it took to find him. We kept expecting him to come back. The kids were terrified, much more than anyone should be, on Halloween. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. First, I would like to thank all my paid Patreon subscribers and letting you know that I also have an exclusive Halloween story, which will be posted in the next few days. As usual with those stories, the audio will be available to all paid members, and I will provide the text of the story for all members. So I want to thank my two VIPs, Chiamerah and Pixie Hopper 8, and also thanks to my other paid members, Stinky News, EricaOdd, Tracy Sellars, Chronic J, and Heidi H. I'm sorry this video took a while to come out. I do have a lot of Halloween stories I want to get out to you guys. I just had a couple of difficult weeks, so I mean, nothing bad has happened other than the fact that my possum still hasn't come back. That has made me kind of sad. But we've been dealing with a few things here with the cats and stuff. Don't worry, they're all fine. But it's been a couple days of depression here and there, and I've just had a lot to do. But don't worry, I will have a lot of videos, and there's much more coming out for you this October. I'm not going to let Halloween month go by without you guys getting as scared as I can possibly help make you. Now, if you like the video, let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, hit the subscribe button and the bell to get notified of new videos. Leave me a comment, which I'll do my best to get back to, and share the video with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please send it to the address included in the description. Speaking of that, there are a couple people who have submitted stories that I have not narrated yet. I will get them narrated before the end of this month, I promise you. I'm going to do a subscriber video. So if anybody has a story you'd like to add, please send it to me and I can add it to that. I have about 4 submitted stories so far, and they will all 4 be in the video. Now, I would like to mention my free Patreon members: Lori Hicks, Lisa Herman, Anthony Bowers, Remi, Venikins, Rose Metro, Woofer McWooferson, Cindy Cleveland, Vanapira Rayne, William H., Alien Unicorn 13, Kathryn Lynch, The Bama Guy 334, Michael Vasquez, Bonnie Lynn, Collet Bond, Krista Pike, Prince UVA, HF Creations, Bonnie Gibbs, Linda Moore, DJ Lira, and Evil Black Cat. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Halloween Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.